Hello, and welcome to another edition of Day Drinking with Kevin. I'm your host, Kevin McGuire. And today we go on the road to Rutherford in Napa to one of my favorite wineries, Foley Johnson Winery. I'm honored to speak to Gio Verdejo, the head winemaker at Foley Johnson. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. So, Gio, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and our day drinkers out there. In all of this time that I've had a YouTube channel, I've interviewed winery owners, I've interviewed education directors, sommeliers, and I've never interviewed a winemaker before, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, except for the fact that I must have saved my favorite all-time winery for now, because my wife and I visited in 2012 to Foley Johnson when I guess Mr. Foley just had purchased the property.
That's correct.
And he treated us like we were the only people at the winery that particular day, explaining how he just bought the place and all of his goals, dreams, and aspirations for the product. And ever since then, we've been members of the Foley Johnson Food and Wine Society. As I mentioned to you on the phone, we have hundreds of bottles of things that you have had your hand in making. And every time we come to Napa, Foley Johnson is definitely on the list of places that we want to see, for sure, when we bring clients and friends and so forth.
Well,
So
that's great to know. Thank you.
you're welcome. I'm very curious as to how you got your start in wine. What kind of made you decide, hey, I want to be a winemaker, and your path to now being the head winemaker at Foley Johnson?
Yeah, so this is about 21 years ago, almost. We're like about 3 weeks from it.
Okay.
They were looking for a person to do drywall up at Coletto, on top of the hill. The winery was under construction. A friend of mine and I were kind of starting a little drywall company that is probably wasn't going to go anywhere. We're barely 19 years old. So I took the job, went up there, put the drywall. During that transition, they were looking for a cellar worker, and I kind of weighed my options. I didn't think that the drywall thing was going to last, so I took the position as a cellar intern, and I never looked back. At the same time, I was taking classes at the Napa Valley College, and yeah, little by little, I kind of, worked my way up to cellar master, to enologist, to assistant winemaker at Coletto. And then in 2016, I was offered the position of associate winemaker at Langtree, a sister winery. And I did a couple harvests up there, kind of learned the mass production side of winemaking, along with a high end, because we had our DTC that came from a special vineyard in Lake County. And in 2018, I was offered the position of head winemaker at Foley Johnson, and to me it was probably the best. I always wanted to make wine in Napa, and to be back, and not to mention that it's 15 minutes from home, so that's that's always a plus. But I love Rutherford cabs. I love Napa wines. I love the weather. I love the soil. I love the people, the scenery. I mean, really, I grew up in Napa, so this is great.
When I describe Foley Johnson wines to people, I tell them that Foley Johnson has helped set the identity and the standard for both Cabernet Sauvignon and Bordeaux blends in the Rutherford and Napa area, and for that matter, a lot of other places as well. As a sommelier, I always use the term Rutherford dust to kind of, explain the uniqueness of the soil that is the Rutherford area. Is that something winemakers actually use too, or is that just a story that the sommeliers made up?
No, there is a difference on the soil. Rutherford was underwater for millions of years, so the soil is very compact. As you know, Oakville, that is just right next. I mean, I don't know. You take a step and you're in Rutherford. One step, you're in Oakville. I'm not sure that we as winemakers use that term a lot, but we understand it. We try to respect the varietal when we harvest, to achieve the best flavors, but at the same time trying to make sure that a cab tastes like cab, Merlot tastes like Merlot, and so on. I think that everything else comes with the territory and just the fact that it's not just it's the heart of Napa Valley, Rutherford. So just
Absolutely.
you get the best of the best.
Well, as the show is called Day Drinking with Kevin, I am celebrating my interview with you today with a 2017 Cabernet from Rutherford that I understand you had a part to play in making this wine.
Correct.
And, so thank you so much
Well, cheers.
for being on the show today. Gio, there's no question that 2020 was a particularly difficult year. We had a global pandemic in Napa and Sonoma. They had fires and things that was devastating to the Napa community. Restaurant workers were laid off in droves because of the pandemic and other things. How has Foley Johnson kind of dealt with all of those challenges, and how are they going to come out stronger on the other end of all of this?
Well, we follow the protocols that were given by the state. Social distancing. We're a really small crew to begin with. There's only three of us in production. That at the time we're looking. Well, at the time there was four in Napa, overlooking Coletto, Maris, and Foley Johnson. So to begin with, we're a really small crew. We're not mixing with a lot of people. Kept us safe. With the fires, I mean, that is very unpredictable. You just kind of have to ride it and see what happens. Luckily, we were able to kind of weather off the fire a little bit. We didn't suffer much at Foley Johnson from smoke taint. We lost our Petit Verdot, which is one of my favorite, to smoke taint, not permanently, but just 2020. And yeah, the wines are tasting good. I mean, we're still making sure that that because the smoke taint can come back. You can taste it in the barrel later on or in bottle, which is even worse. So we're constantly tasting the wines, making sure that we don't have any smoke taint. So far, everything seems to be clean. Moving forward, Foley Family Wines is giving us the tools to be proactive, to be, there's no way. I mean, you can't prevent fires, but, you can't prevent the smoke taint. There's a lot of research, and nothing is really conclusive to tell you at what point you're safe from the smoke taint, distance, time. Nothing really tells you that. The only thing that we can do is just try to be proactive, making sure that we can test our grapes for smoke taint before and after, just to make sure that where's our starting point, on the chemical that gives you the smoke taint versus after there's smoke taint, if there's anything, and I guess we're just gonna have to do that until we really understand how the smoke really works or how we get affected.
Every time I come to Napa, I get that sense of family and community and, just the passion that everybody has for wines. But the thing that really impresses me is the way the community bonds together in the face of any kind of challenge that they have. And, you see people with T-shirts and bands that say Napa Strong on them. But I think there is something to that. Because when there is a challenge like a fire or an earthquake or something else happens, it seems like everybody bonds together, no matter what winery you work for or what region you're in, to help get that person or get that area back up into production as quickly as possible. Has that been your experience as well?
Oh yeah, totally. Like you mentioned, we're like a big family here in the Napa community. In the last few years, I grew up in Napa, so I've seen it change a lot from, nothing to do after 6 p.m. till now, people walking on the streets midnight and whatnot. And it feels good. I was not born in Napa. I was born in Mexico City, so I've always felt part of the community. I've always felt welcome, and I think that kind of passes on to everyone else that comes in as interns, visitors, and everybody else, as you mentioned, your experience also coming into Napa.
Yeah, that I get that same sense.
Mm-hmm.
As a winemaker, I'm guessing there's probably a favorite grape or a favorite vintage or something that you say, this is what I have done that I'm the most proud of. Is there a particular favorite vintage so far, or is there a particular favorite grape that you love working with?
You know, drinking, I like the 97s, Napa 97 Cabs, the vintage, but I couldn't tell you anything about the vintage because I was a sophomore in high school, so I didn't really pay attention to the weather other than whether we can play outside or not.
Mhm.
Um, but I really like the 2010 vintage. It was cool, and then they got a couple heat spikes, kind of pushed the variation and the harvest, and the yields were low and very very flavorful. Um, I did get my hands on the 2010 Syrah, which is one of my favorites from Coletto. And from Foley Johnson so far, I think that the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc is my favorite right now. I mean, you gotta give the reds a little time to age, but
Mhm.
the Sauvignon Blanc right now is tasting really good. We fermented in concrete eggs
Okay.
on its lees and stay there for a couple months, and it has a lot of structure. Even though the alcohol is very low, I think it's 12.5.
Mhm.
I mean, it's loaded with structure, and I'm really happy with it. Um, on the reds, of course, the Cab, the Petit Verdot is one of my favorite. The Cab that comes from the vineyard that the bottle that you showed, Peral,
Mhm.
that has a really cool story because it comes from a Peral means pear orchard in Spanish, and it comes from a really old pear orchard that was planted over 100 years ago. We still have the remains of it. We have one pear tree that's over 100 years old.
Wow.
Um, and it's believed that that was part of the first grant that was given to George Yunt, the father of Napa Valley.
Mhm.
I think it was 12,000 acres that they gave him as a grant. And we have the remains of his first orchards, which I think is pretty cool.
Wow. Thank you for that because when people come into the restaurant, they're always looking for stories about wines and they're looking to be able to identify to the people who make it, to the place that is. And if you don't mind, I will use that story moving forward
Oh
because
yeah,
I absolutely do believe that if people can kind of associate a little bit more in their mind with what they're drinking, not just what's in the glass, but everything that went into making that wine, then that experience is that much more powerful for them, for sure.
another fun fact about this the vineyard or the land that was granted. George Yunt had to become a Mexican citizen to acquire the land because at that time California belonged to Mexico.
In all the years I've been studying wine, I never knew that. So that is another interesting fact.
Yeah, because I
Uh,
think California became part of the United States in 1940 something, and this is back in I mean, 1840 something, and this is in the 1830s when this happened. So
wow.
a few years prior.
You mentioned earlier the Foley Johnson family.
Hmm.
And one of the things that impresses me the most every time I visit there is how they treat you as family when you come to visit the winery. And
Hmm.
first of all, it's a beautiful winery and tasting room. And all the people that work there are incredibly friendly. There was one time that we had visited the day before, and the next day we were on a wine trip, and the driver locked the keys in the car, and our entire party got stranded where we were. And let's just say the place we were at wasn't the best wines that they could have produced in Napa, and we were stuck there for several hours. And I called the tasting room and I said, hey, we just got the keys back. Our whole day has been ruined. Is there any way that you would take this group that I'm with? And the lady recognized me from the day before and said, of course. And she ended up staying open later and treating the group as if they were the only important thing in her life that day. And
That's
it's
very
experiences like that I will always remember about Foley Johnson because not only do they have some of my favorite wines that I have you to thank for, but I think the overall experience and how they treat people and how they're not just drink this wine, step to the right, drink this wine, how many bottles do you want? And there are places like that,
mhm.
but they take the time to tell you the stories of the wines and
Yeah,
the history of the winemaker and the different parcels of land and maybe even the vintage that year and how it was wet right before berry picking or not and interesting like that. And I've always found my visits there to be quite enjoyable. So you have an amazing place to work.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's passed on from Bill himself all the way down to all of us. Once a month, we get together, well, now via Zoom, and we taste a varietal, and he's very involved in the tastings and giving his opinion. And more than often, if I'm putting my blends together and I call Courtney Foley if she wants to taste with me, she would make the time and come and taste with me. So they're very involved on the winemaking part of it, and they're very proud of the brand and everything that we do.
I think I told you when we first talked that I had met Mr. Foley, and I really didn't know who he was. And I actually went to a pastry competition in Las Vegas and was at a particular restaurant there and opened up the wine list. And there, prominently on the first page, was Foley Johnson wines. And I was like,
Interesting.
I can't imagine, how would they know about Foley Johnson? This is my favorite place. And he goes, yeah, Mr. Foley owns the Vegas Golden Knights. So, in addition to the wineries, he owns the Knights, and
Mm.
we're the restaurant right next to the hockey stadium, and they were doing well at the time. And so that's why they were featuring the wines. And then, of course, I looked like a genius to all of the people that were at dinner that night because I could tell them about all of the wines, having been a wine club member since the very beginning in
Mhm.
2012. So that's really, really cool.
Well, don't be surprised that during playoffs, there's a 20 by 20 feet flag of the Golden Knights hanging at Foley Johnson. We always do every year.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I will root for them anytime they're not playing my Capitals.
Right on.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I'm a big Capitals fan, but what can you do? Um, when you think about wines, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was this little thumbprint on the bottles that says handmade. Where did that come from?
So the handmade term comes from pretty much all the wines are handmade.
Sure.
We sour the grapes. Well, everything is handpicked.
Mhm.
We sour the grapes by hand. Of course, everything else, happens, ferments in tank, goes down the barrel. We taste constantly every single barrel to make sure that the flavors and everything is optimal. Every single barrel is to the standard of Foley Johnson, and yeah, we take pride on doing handmade wines. Originally, the handmade story came from when Foley Johnson was purchased. There wasn't much wine as uh, as to sell in the tasting room, so all the wineries were asked to make a barrel for them, just one barrel, handmade, hand bottled, everything. So that's how the story of the handmade came to be. But as we grew the vineyards and we were able to produce more wine, it stayed as our reserve wine. So the handmade is our reserve wine.
I was talking with a winery owner the other day, and he said that one of the benefits, if you will, of the pandemic in 2020 was that the wineries were not able to sell all the wines that they had to sell. So they were able to maybe do some additional things to the wines that they maybe hadn't, necessarily had time to do in the past. Maybe things like extra aging or extra bottle time or maybe experimenting with lead stirring or something else. Has that been the case at Foley Johnson? Are you doing anything different with the wines that you had reserved that maybe you didn't have a chance to sell?
I mean, the only thing that happened is that our bottling got pushed a year later. A year, I mean, I'm sorry, a month later, because of fires. We didn't want to have people in the middle of the smoke having to work outside. But as far as the winemaking techniques, no, nothing changed. Like I said, we do everything. We're really peculiar and meticulous on tasting every single barrel. That didn't change. We were expecting to have the 2020 anyway. We
Mhm.
have it. Nothing changed. So we're still treating our wine like it's still the best wine in Napa, and hopefully bottle it. But if it doesn't make it to standard, then we just won't. It has to be good or not,
I
but
have
we will
yet
make
to
it.
find a vintage, and it appears that you've been associated with Foley Johnson for quite a while. I've yet to find a vintage that isn't incredible. And as I said at the beginning, I think that the Foley Johnson wines, the Cabernets, the Bordeaux blends, the Zinfandels, and everything, the Petit Verdot. They help to define, I think, the identity of the Rutherford district, and they set the standard for what can be made in this area, and you have a significant part to play in that. And I bet there's a tremendous source of pride when it comes to what you're able to produce.
Oh yeah, totally. We, my team and I, are really happy, and we're really proud of what we're making. We're given the tools to do something right, to do good wine, not good wine, to make the best wine that we can. And Foley Family Wines is willing to give us the tool to make that happen, from farming experiments, tools, equipment, everything that we need is at our hands reach, so we can make the best wine possible. So yeah, we take pride at the same time that we're lucky to be able to have those options as well.
You mentioned one of those tools earlier as the concrete egg.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever saw the television show Mork and Mindy, but I picture these eggs as leftover set props from Mork and Mindy way back when, because they're these huge egg-looking things. But I understand they weigh like 2,000 or 3,000 pounds empty.
Oh yeah.
Why age wine in eggs as opposed to tanks or barrels? What's the thought process there?
So concrete is also porous, like a barrel. So unlike making Sauvignon Blanc as stainless steel, you close the tank and there's nothing. The wine is not breathing. And on concrete, the wine breathes like it would in a barrel as well. Also, the shape of the egg helps the yeast when the yeast dies. I mean, it's still the protein's still there, and they kind of stay on the shape of the egg. So 3/4 of the wine is touching in contact with a protein, and that gives you the mouthfeel, the complexity, better than with a barrel, because even the barrel had that same shape as longer, so it kind of settles in the bottom, and on the egg it stays suspended a little bit higher, and it gives you better complexity, in my opinion.
All right. Well, I trust your opinion. In the barrels, a lot of times they either have to stir the lees with that special rod, or they sometimes have the barrels that roll up and down. Do you have to stir the lees in the eggs, or does that kind of happen?
No, they stay pretty suspended, but every now and then we would just maybe push a little bit of nitrogen or argon, just to kind of disturb the lees and stay a little more suspended, but not as much as you would with the batonnage in the barrel.
Fantastic. Well, tonight I am going to celebrate this interview with a blue cheese encrusted ribeye, with I think a mushroom risotto and some grilled asparagus. I hope that meets with your approval for.
I mean,
that would pair with your heart of your work. I'm guessing that every one of these bottles that you produce is like one of your children, and you feel a certain sense of accomplishment when they leave the house. Well, I've got a very large extended family right behind me of all of your hard work, and I want to thank you so much for making the amazing wine that you do. B, for taking the time to speak with me and the fellow day drinkers out there about your wines and about your journey to get here today. I wish you all the health and happiness and success in all of your future vintages and efforts at Foley Johnson. Gio, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, and thank you for your time.
All right. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gio, for taking the time to speak with me today. And day drinkers, if you're ever in Napa, go to Foley Johnson in Rutherford and tell Gio that Kevin sent you. If you like this episode, please don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Day Drinking with Kevin. And if you have ideas for future episodes, don't hesitate to email me at daydrinkingwithkevin@gmail.com. Until next time, I say, salute.